The starship Meridian drifted through the darkness of the Kepler belt, its hull scarred from years of salvage missions in the outer reaches of human space. And Commander Jake Hartley stood at the bridge, watching the debris field spread out before them, like a graveyard of metal and fire. "What do we have here?" he asked, his voice calm despite the strange feeling crawling up his spine. Lieutenant Danny Price checked his scanner and frowned at the readings. The wreckage was unlike anything they had encountered before, with alloys that did not match any known human or allied species construction. "Sir, this is Valorian," Danny said, and the words hung in the recycled air like a curse. Everyone on the bridge went silent. The Valorians were ancient, cold, and powerful beyond measure, ruling a quarter of the galaxy for 10,000 years, while humanity was still learning to make fire. They did not lose ships, and they certainly did not leave wreckage floating in space for anyone to find. Jake made his decision quickly. They would investigate, document everything, and get out before anyone noticed. He called for a salvage team, and specifically requested Amy Lawson, his best engineer, to lead the search through the wreckage. Amy was already suiting up when Jake reached the airlock bay. She was a small woman with steady hands and curious eyes, the kind of person who saw broken things and immediately wanted to understand how they worked. She had joined the Meridian 3 years ago, after leaving a comfortable job on Earth Station 7, seeking something she could not name. "Be careful in there," Jake told her, and Amy smiled at him. "When am I not careful?" she replied, pulling on her helmet and stepping into the airlock with 2 other crew members behind her. The Valorian ship was a twisted maze of corridors and shattered chambers. Whatever had destroyed it had done so with tremendous force, leaving scorch marks on walls that should have been indestructible. Amy moved through the wreckage with her flashlight, cutting through the darkness, her breath loud in her helmet. She found bodies. Valorians were tall and pale, with features that seemed carved from marble rather than born from flesh. Even in death, they looked regal and cold, their eyes open and staring at nothing. Amy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the vacuum outside her suit. "Commander, I am seeing signs of internal explosion," she reported through the comm. This ship was destroyed from within, not attacked from outside. Jake's voice crackled back. "Any idea what caused it?" Amy did not answer right away, because she had found something. At the end of a corridor, behind a door that had been blown off its hinges, sat a cargo container, sealed with locks that pulsed with faint blue light. The container was untouched, perfect, as if the destruction had somehow avoided it on purpose. "I found something," Amy whispered, moving closer. Her crew members helped her drag the container back to the Meridian. It took all 3 of them to carry it, not because it was heavy, but because the locks seemed to resist their touch, sending small shocks through their gloves whenever they gripped it wrong. Back on the ship, Jake ordered the container brought to the cargo bay. He called for their xenobiologist, a nervous young man named Kevin Shaw, to examine it. Kevin ran his scanners over the surface, and his face went pale. "Commander, this container has Valorian royal seals," Kevin said. "Whatever is inside is considered sacred to them." "Can you open it?" Jake asked. Kevin shook his head. "The locks are biometric. Only Valorian DNA should be able to open them." But something strange happened. The locks began to glow brighter, and then they simply clicked open. Everyone stepped back except Amy, who moved forward as if pulled by an invisible thread. Inside the container, resting on a bed of silver fabric, was an egg. It was the size of a human head, covered in scales that shifted colors like oil on water. And it was warm. Amy could feel the heat radiating from it even through her suit. "Is that what I think it is?" Danny asked from behind her. Kevin was already checking his database, his hands shaking. A Valorian dragon egg. There are only 7 known to exist in the entire galaxy. They are genetically engineered weapons, bonded telepathically to their handlers at the moment of hatching. The Valorians guard them with their lives. Then why was it on that ship? Jake asked. Why was it abandoned? No one had an answer, but Amy was not listening anymore. The egg had begun to crack. Small fractures appeared across its surface, spreading like lightning frozen in time. Amy acted without thinking, pulling off her thermal gloves and lifting the egg from its container. The warmth flooded into her hands and traveled up her arms, filling her chest with a sensation she could not describe. "Lawson, what are you doing?" Jake shouted. "It is cold," Amy said, though the egg was clearly warm. She pressed it against her chest, cradling it like a child. "It has been alone for so long, and it needs warmth." The cracks widened, and pieces of shell began to fall away. The crew watched in stunned silence as a small creature emerged, wet and trembling, and beautiful. It had scales that matched the shifting colors of the egg, wings folded tight against its body, and eyes of pure gold that held an intelligence far older than any human. The dragon looked up at Amy, and Amy looked down at the dragon. Something passed between them. Something that the others could feel, like static electricity in the air. The dragon pressed its snout against Amy's heartbeat and made a sound that was almost like a purr. "Oh no," Kevin whispered. "The bond has formed." Jake grabbed his arm. "What does that mean?" "It means the dragon has chosen her as its handler," Kevin explained. "The bond is telepathic and unbreakable. Where one goes, the other follows. This has never happened with a human before, and the Valorians will come for it." As if the universe wanted to confirm his words, the ship's alarms suddenly blared. Danny ran to the nearest console, and his face drained of color. "Commander, we have incoming contacts," he said. "Valorian warships, at least 12 of them, and they are heading straight for us." Amy held the small dragon closer, feeling its heartbeat against her own. She did not know what the future held, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not let anyone take this creature from her, no matter how powerful they were. The dragon, as if sensing her thoughts, looked up at her with those ancient golden eyes, and she could swear it understood everything. "I will call you Ember," Amy whispered, "and I will keep you safe." Ember chirped softly and nestled deeper into her arms, choosing warmth over cold, choosing love over purpose, choosing the strange human woman who had held her first. The Valorian fleet grew closer, and the crew of the Meridian prepared for the fight of their lives. The Valorian dreadnought emerged from faster-than-light travel, like a mountain appearing from fog, its dark hull stretching for miles in every direction, making the Meridian look like a toy boat beside an ocean liner. Commander Jake Hartley stood on his bridge and felt his stomach drop at the sight. "They are hailing us," Danny said, his voice barely above a whisper. Jake straightened his uniform and nodded. "Put them through." The view screen flickered, and a face appeared that would haunt the crew's nightmares for years. High Emissary Kale Sorrenthaw stood 7 feet tall, with skin like polished stone and eyes that held no warmth, no mercy, no recognition of anything as soft as compassion. His voice filled the bridge like winter wind. "Human vessel, you have stolen sacred property of the Valorian Empire," Sorrenthaw said. "You will surrender the dragon egg immediately, and you will surrender the criminal who dared to touch it. She will face execution for her blasphemy." Jake felt anger rise in his chest, an emotion that surprised him with its intensity. The egg hatched on its own, and the dragon bonded with one of my crew. "We did not steal anything," Jake insisted, his voice firm. Sorrenthos tilted his head slightly, a gesture that somehow conveyed both curiosity and contempt. "The bond is irrelevant. The dragon belongs to the Empire, and the human who corrupted it must die. You have 1 hour to comply, or we will reduce your ship to atoms." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in heavy silence. Jake turned to his crew and saw fear on their faces, but also something else, something that looked like determination. "Danny, send an emergency signal to Earth Command," Jake ordered. "Tell them everything." "Sir, even if they respond, our fleet cannot match the Vylorians," Danny said. "I know," Jake replied, "but we are not giving up, Amy or Ember, without a fight." In the cargo bay that had been converted to a temporary quarters, Amy sat with Ember curled in her lap. The dragon had grown noticeably in just a few hours, now the size of a large cat, and Amy could feel its emotions bleeding into her mind like colors mixing in water. Fear and confusion swirled together, but beneath them was something stronger, a bond of trust that felt more real than anything Amy had ever experienced. Kevin entered the bay with a tablet in his hands and worry on his face. "I have been researching Valorian dragons," he said. "The bond you share with Ember should not be possible. Their genetic engineering specifically prevents bonding with non-Valorian species." "Then how did it happen?" Amy asked. Kevin shrugged helplessly. "Maybe the egg was damaged, maybe there was a mutation, or maybe there is something about humans that the Valorians never considered." Ember lifted her head and looked at Kevin with those golden eyes. Amy felt a pulse of something through their bond, a thought that was not quite words, but carried meaning nonetheless. The dragon was not broken or mutated. She had simply wanted something different than what she was designed for. "She chose me," Amy said softly. "She was cold and alone and scared, and she chose warmth." Kevin stared at her. "Dragons do not choose. They are programmed to bond with the first Valorian handler they encounter." "Maybe that is what the Valorians believe," Amy replied, "but I think Ember knows better." The hour passed faster than anyone wanted, and when the deadline arrived, something incredible happened. Instead of Valorian weapons firing, new contacts appeared on the scanners, dozens of them, emerging from faster-than-light travel in a wave of human determination. Admiral Grace Nolan commanded the Third Fleet from the bridge of the battleship Constellation, and her voice came through the comm with the force of a hurricane. "Valorian vessel, this is Admiral Nolan of the United Coalition Fleet. The Meridian and her crew are under our protection. Any hostile action will be considered an act of war." Sorrenthos appeared on the view screen again, his marble face showing the faintest crack of surprise. "You would go to war over one woman and one dragon? Your species has only traveled the stars for 2 centuries. We have ruled for 10,000 years. You cannot win." Admiral Nolan smiled, and it was not a friendly smile. "Maybe not, but we will make you bleed for every inch. Humans are stubborn that way." A standoff began that would last for 3 weeks. The Valorian fleet surrounded the human ships, and the human ships refused to move. Diplomats were called, threats were exchanged, and the galaxy watched with held breath. No one had ever defied the Valorian Empire so openly, and no one knew how it would end. During those 3 weeks, something remarkable happened aboard the Meridian. Ember continued to grow, but not at a normal rate. She grew faster than any recorded dragon, reaching the size of a large dog within days. Her wings unfurling and her scales hardening into armor that shimmered with inner light. Kevin ran test after test, trying to understand what was happening, and finally he came to Jake and Amy with his findings. Valorian dragons grow based on the emotional energy of their bond, he explained. Valorians are cold by nature, controlling their emotions with strict discipline. Their dragons grow slowly over centuries. But humans are different, Amy said, understanding dawning. Exactly, Kevin confirmed. Human emotions are intense and varied and constant. Amy loves Ember, fears for her, feels joy in her presence, worries about the future. All of that emotional energy is pouring into the bond, and Ember is growing because of it. Jake frowned. The Valorians must know this is happening. Their scanners are better than ours. They do know, Kevin said. I intercepted some of their communications. They are concerned, maybe even afraid, A dragon raised on human emotion could become more powerful than anything they have ever created. In the standoff between the fleets, Sorrenthos requested something unexpected. He asked for a meeting with Amy Lawson, not as a demand, but as what seemed like genuine curiosity. Jake did not trust it, but Amy agreed to go. She walked onto the Valorian ship with Ember at her side, the dragon now large enough to ride, her scales gleaming under the cold lights. Valorian guards lined the corridors, their faces showing nothing, but Amy could feel their unease through Ember's senses. Sorrenthos waited in a chamber of dark metal and pale light. He looked at Amy and Ember with those ancient eyes and asked a single question. "Why did you pick up the egg?" Amy thought about the question carefully. Because it was cold, and it was alone, and it needed help. "That is not a reason," Sorrenthos said. "That is instinct, animal behavior." "Maybe," Amy replied, "but it is also what makes us human. We see something hurting, and we want to help it. We do not need a reason beyond that." Sorrenthos stared at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his marble face, something that might have been the ghost of understanding. The standoff continued, but the rules had changed. Humanity had shown the galaxy that they would not be pushed, that they would stand for what they believed in, even against impossible odds. And in the bond between Amy and Ember, something new was growing, something that would change everything. The meeting between Amy and Sorrenthos continued in that cold chamber aboard the Valorian dreadnought. And with each passing moment, the high emissary seemed to grow more confused by the small human woman standing before him. "You speak of warmth as if it were a virtue," Sorrenthos said, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "But warmth is weakness. It makes you vulnerable. It clouds judgment. It leads to poor decisions. The Valorian Empire has survived 10,000 years because we eliminated such weaknesses." Amy looked at Ember, who stood beside her like a guardian made of shifting colors and golden light. The dragon had grown even larger since boarding the Valorian ship, responding to Amy's heightened emotions in this tense place. Through their bond, Amy could feel Ember's fierce protectiveness and her complete lack of fear. "You call it weakness," Amy said, "but look at what warmth has created. Ember is stronger than any dragon you have raised, and she has only been alive for a few weeks. Maybe warmth is not weakness at all. Maybe it is something you lost so long ago that you forgot what it could do." Sorrenthos moved closer, studying Amy with the intensity of a scientist examining an unusual specimen. "You truly believe this creature loves you?" "I know she does," Amy replied. "I can feel it. Can you say the same about your dragons?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Sorrenthos did not answer. Instead, he turned away and walked to a viewport that showed the standoff of fleets outside, human ships and Valorian ships facing each other in the cold dark of space. "I have commanded dragons for 300 years, he said finally. "I have led them into battle, watched them destroy enemy vessels, used them as tools of war. But I have never once felt what you describe. They obey because they are designed to obey, not because they choose to." Amy felt a wave of sadness that surprised her. "That sounds lonely," she said. Sorrenthos turned back to her with something flickering in his ancient eyes, something that might have been recognition. "We do not experience loneliness. We eliminated that weakness long ago." "No," Amy said softly. "I think you just stopped noticing it." The meeting ended without resolution, but something had shifted. Sorrenthos escorted Amy and Ember back to their shuttle personally, a gesture that seemed to surprise even his own guards. Before Amy boarded, he spoke one more time. "Your people are young and foolish, and you will likely destroy yourselves with all that emotion you carry," he said. "But I find myself curious to see what happens next." Back aboard the Meridian, Amy told Jake and the others about the conversation. Kevin listened with fascination, taking notes on his tablet about Valorian psychology and culture. Danny suggested that Serenthos might be looking for an excuse to avoid war, while Jake remained cautious and suspicious. But it was Ember who provided the most important insight. As Amy sat in her quarters that night, the dragon projected images and feelings into her mind, sharing memories that were not Amy's own. These were older memories, passed down through generations of dragons, encoded in their very cells. Amy saw the first dragons, the original creatures, before the Valorians changed them. They were wild and free and full of emotion, bonding with their partners out of love rather than programming. She saw the moment when Valorian scientists began their modifications, cutting away the parts of dragon nature that made them unpredictable, leaving only obedience and power. She also saw something else, a deep sadness buried in the dragon genome like a scar that never healed. The dragons remembered what they had lost, even if they could not feel it anymore. They carried the echo of warmth in their cells, waiting for someone to wake it up again. Amy woke Kevin in the middle of the night and told him what she had learned. His eyes went wide as he processed the information. "If this is true, then Ember is not a mutation or an accident," he said. "She is a reversion, a return to what dragons were always meant to be. Your warmth did not corrupt her, it healed her." "Can you prove it?" Amy asked. Kevin nodded slowly. "With the right equipment, maybe. But I would need access to Valorian genetic records, and they would never share those with us." 3 days later, something unexpected happened. A shuttle arrived from the Valorian dreadnought, carrying a single passenger, an elderly Valorian scholar named Lyris Veneth. She requested permission to study Ember, claiming that she wanted to understand the anomaly for scientific purposes. Jake did not trust her, but Amy insisted on meeting with her. There was something in Lyris's eyes that reminded Amy of herself, a curiosity that burned beneath the cold Valorian exterior. They met in the cargo bay, with Ember between them, and Lyris spent a long time simply looking at the dragon. When she finally spoke, her voice was different from Serenthos's, softer and somehow warmer. "I have spent my entire life studying dragons," Lyris said. "I have read every record, examined every specimen, traced the history of our modifications back to the beginning, and in all that time, I have never seen a dragon like this one." "What makes her different?" Amy asked. Lyris moved closer, reaching out a hand toward Ember. The dragon allowed the touch, which surprised everyone. "Her brain patterns are different. The modifications we made thousands of years ago, the ones that removed emotion and choice, they are not active in her. It is as if they were switched off." "Because of the bond with Amy?" Kevin asked. "Partially," Lyris confirmed, "but there is more. The modifications were designed to be permanent, impossible to reverse. The fact that they can be deactivated suggests that perhaps they were never as complete as we believed." She turned to Amy with something like hope in her ancient eyes. "Tell me about warmth," she said. "I have read about it in old texts, but I do not understand what it means." Amy took a deep breath and tried to explain something that should not need explanation. She talked about holding someone you love and feeling their heart beat against yours. She talked about laughter and tears and the way sadness and joy could exist in the same moment. She talked about choosing to care for something even when it was hard, even when it hurt, even when there was no logical reason to do so. Lyris listened with an expression that slowly transformed from confusion to wonder. "We had this once," she whispered. "A very long time ago, before we decided that emotions were inefficient. We felt warmth, and we gave it up because we thought it made us weak." "It does not make you weak," Amy said. "It makes you strong in ways that matter more than power or control." Ember moved between them and pressed her head against Lyris's hand. The old scholar gasped as she felt something she had never experienced before, a pulse of warmth traveling through the dragon's touch and into her cold Valorian heart. "I need to show the council," Lyris said, her voice trembling. "They need to see what you have shown me. Everything we believed was wrong, and this dragon, this beautiful, impossible dragon, is the proof." Amy watched her go with a feeling of cautious hope. Something was changing, something bigger than one woman and one dragon, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The Valorian Council convened in a chamber that had not seen true debate in 3,000 years. 12 High Lords sat in a circle of cold light, their faces carved from generations of controlled emotion, their minds sharp with 10,000 years of accumulated knowledge and power. At the center of the circle stood Lyris Veneth, with her findings and her hope. She presented her research carefully, showing genetic comparisons between Ember and standard Valorian dragons, demonstrating how the modifications designed to suppress emotion had simply stopped working in the presence of human warmth. She spoke of the ancient records she had found, texts that described the original dragons as creatures of profound feeling and free will. Some of the High Lords listened with interest, but others grew angry. Lord Cassian Vex rose from his seat with fury in his ancient eyes. "This is heresy," he declared. "Our ancestors perfected the dragons. They removed their weaknesses and made them weapons worthy of the Empire. This human woman has corrupted sacred property, and you would have us celebrate her crime." Lyris stood her ground. "I would have us face the truth, my lord. The dragons were not perfected. They were diminished. We took something beautiful and powerful and reduced it to a tool. This human woman has shown us what we lost." The debate raged for hours, while the standoff continued in space above. Ambassador teams from both sides worked on possible compromises, but the real decisions would be made in this chamber, where old beliefs clashed with new evidence. High Emissary Sorrenthos had remained silent throughout the debate, watching and listening with those marble eyes. When he finally spoke, the chamber fell quiet. "I met the human woman," he said. "I asked her why she picked up the egg, and her answer confused me. She said she did it because the egg was cold and alone. She did not expect reward or advantage. She simply saw something that needed warmth and provided it." Lord Vex scoffed. "And this impressed you? Such sentimentality is beneath us." "Perhaps," Sorrenthos replied, "but consider what that sentimentality has produced. A dragon that grows faster than any in recorded history, that displays abilities our dragons take centuries to develop, that has bonded with its handler in a way that makes our own bonds look shallow by comparison. We have always believed that emotion was weakness, but what if we were wrong?" The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything the Valorian Empire had built. Some lords looked thoughtful, others looked furious, and the debate continued with new intensity. Meanwhile, aboard the Meridian, Amy received an unexpected visitor. A young Valorian officer named Marcus Vale arrived under flag of diplomatic immunity, claiming he needed to speak with her privately. Jake was suspicious, but Amy agreed to the meeting with Ember at her side. Marcus was different from the other Valorians Amy had met. There was something almost warm in his eyes, a spark that seemed out of place in that cold species. He spoke quickly and quietly, glancing at the door as if afraid of being overheard. "The council is divided," he said. "Some want war, some want compromise, and some are beginning to question everything we have believed for thousands of years. I came to warn you that the hardliners are planning something." "Planning what?" Amy asked. "Lord Vex has proposed a ritual, an ancient ceremony that can sever the bond between a dragon and its handler," Marcus explained. "It would free Ember from your influence and return her to proper Valorian control. They are going to offer it as a compromise, allowing you to live in exchange for the severing." Amy felt cold fear grip her heart, but through the bond she felt Ember's response, a fierce rejection that burned like fire. The dragon would not be taken, would not be controlled, would not go back to the cold existence her kind had endured for millennia. What happens to dragons who go through this ritual? Amy asked. Marcus hesitated. They lose something. The bond carries emotions and memories, and when it is severed, those are severed too. The dragon becomes empty, obedient, perfect by our standards. A weapon, Amy said bitterly. Yes, Marcus agreed. I know this sounds strange coming from a Valorian, but I do not want that for Ember. What you have shown us, what she has become, it proves that there is another way. Some of us want to find that way. Amy studied him carefully. Why are you helping us? Because I read the old texts. I know what we used to be, before we cut away our feelings. My ancestors loved their dragons, and their dragons loved them back. We gave that up for power and control, and we have been cold ever since. Watching you and Ember, I felt something I thought my kind had lost forever. What did you feel? Amy asked. Marcus smiled, and it transformed his face into something almost human. Hope. The council's offer arrived the next day, exactly as Marcus had warned. The Valorians would allow Amy to live, would even allow humanity to keep their dignity. If she agreed to sever the bond with Ember, the dragon would be returned to the Empire, raised properly, and the incident would be forgotten. Jake called a meeting of his senior officers to discuss the offer. Danny argued that they should accept, that one dragon was not worth a war. Kevin disagreed, saying that Ember represented something too important to surrender. Amy listened to both sides, but she already knew what she had to do. I want to ask Ember, she said. The room went silent. The idea of asking a dragon for its opinion was so far outside Valorian culture that it had never occurred to them as an option. But Amy knew that Ember was not just a weapon or a symbol. She was a thinking, feeling being who deserved a voice in her own fate. Amy closed her eyes and reached through the bond, opening herself fully to Ember's mind. She asked the question without words, sharing feelings and images instead of language. She showed Ember the choice, the paths that lay ahead, the consequences of each decision. Ember's response came back like a wave of light and warmth and fierce determination. The dragon showed Amy her own memories, the cold, lonely time inside the egg, the moment of hatching when she first felt human warmth, the joy of every moment since. She showed Amy what she wanted, not with words, but with absolute clarity. The dragon chose Amy. She chose warmth over cold, love over obedience, freedom over control. She chose to stay. Amy opened her eyes with tears running down her face. She wants to stay with me. Kevin was crying too. Dragons do not choose. That is what the Valorians have always said, but Ember just proved them wrong. Jake nodded slowly, his jaw set with determination. Then we tell the council no. We tell them that the dragon has made her choice, and we stand by it. They will not accept that, Danny warned. Maybe not, Jake replied, but some things are worth fighting for, even when you cannot win. Amy looked at Ember, and the dragon looked back with those ancient olden eyes, filled with something that had not existed in dragonkind for thousands of years. Trust, gratitude, and love that needed no words, because it was written in every scale, every heartbeat, every breath they shared. The message was sent, and the galaxy held its breath. Humanity had refused the might of the Valorian Empire, not with weapons or threats, but with something the Empire had forgotten how to fight. They had refused with love. The response from humanity shocked the Valorian Council in ways that 10,000 years of galactic history had not prepared them for. These young, foolish creatures, with their short lives and their burning emotions, had looked at the might of an ancient empire and said no, not because they believed they could win, but because they believed they were right. Lord Vex demanded immediate military action. He argued that allowing this insult to stand would undermine Valorian authority across the galaxy. that other species would see human defiance as permission to resist. His faction pushed for the destruction of the human fleet and the forcible retrieval of the dragon. But Sorrenthos opposed him, and so did Lyris, and one by one, other council members began to speak of doubt and question. The old certainties were cracking, and through those cracks, something new was beginning to grow. "We have ruled through fear and power for millennia," Lyris said to the council. "But this human woman has shown us something our ancestors knew, and we forgot. There are other ways to be strong. There are bonds that cannot be commanded, only offered. We can destroy the humans, yes, but we cannot destroy what they represent." The debate continued for days while the fleets faced each other in the cold silence of space. During this time, something remarkable began to happen aboard the Valorian ships. Word of Ember had spread through the crews, and with it came questions that had been forbidden for thousands of years. Young Valorians began to wonder what it would feel like to be warm. They began to look at their own bonded dragons with new eyes, seeing not weapons but prisoners, creatures who had been robbed of the ability to choose. Some felt shame, others felt curiosity, and a few felt the first stirrings of something they could not name. Marcus Vale contacted Amy again with news from inside the Empire. A movement was growing among younger Valorians, a quiet rebellion against the cold that had defined their species for so long. They wanted to know more about human emotion, about warmth, about what it meant to feel deeply and love freely. "You have started something," Marcus told her. "Even if the Council orders war, you have planted seeds that will not stop growing. Our people are waking up from a very long sleep." Amy shared this news with Jake and the crew, and it gave them hope. Even if they lost the coming battle, even if they died in the darkness of space, their stand would mean something. They had shown the galaxy that warmth was not weakness, and that message would echo long after they were gone. But the battle did not come. On the 7th day of standoff, Lyris Veneth asked permission to address the full Valorian fleet, not just the Council, but every officer, every crew member, every dragon handler. It was an unprecedented request that broke centuries of protocol, and Lord Vex fought against it with everything he had. But Sorrenthos supported her, and when the High Emissary spoke, others listened. The broadcast was approved. Lyris stood before a camera that would transmit her words to 1,000,000 Valorians across 12 warships. And she told them the truth. She showed them the ancient records she had found, the history that had been suppressed, the story of what dragons once were before the Empire cut away their souls. She showed them images of Ember, beautiful and powerful and free, bonded with a human woman who had offered nothing but warmth. "We have been cold for so long that we forgot what we lost," Lyris said. "We told ourselves that emotion was weakness, that warmth was inefficient, that love had no place in our perfect empire. But look at what that belief has cost us. Our dragons obey, but do not love. Our bonds are chains rather than connections. We have power, but we have no joy." She paused, and when she continued, her voice was trembling with something that sounded almost like passion. This human woman held an egg against her heart, because it was cold and alone. She did not know what was inside, did not know the danger or the consequences. She simply offered warmth to something that needed it. And in that moment, she accomplished what our greatest scientists could not. She healed a dragon. The broadcast ended, and silence fell across the fleet. Then something extraordinary happened. Dragon handlers began to reach out to their bonded creatures, not with commands, but with questions, asking if there was anything still alive beneath the modifications, any spark of the original nature waiting to be found. Most dragons did not respond. The programming was too deep, the damage too old. In the depths of genetic memory, buried beneath layers of Valorian control, a few dragons remembered what they had lost, and they reached back. The Vailorian fleet began to fracture, not into war, but into transformation. Hardliners remained committed to tradition, but others began to seek something new. Lord Vex's faction found themselves suddenly isolated, their calls for war drowned out by voices asking different questions. The compromise that finally ended the standoff was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. The Vailorian Empire agreed to recognize Ember's bond with Amy as legitimate, and to study the possibility of allowing future dragons to choose their own handlers. In exchange, humanity agreed to share their understanding of emotion and warmth with any Vailorians who wished to learn. Amy Lawson was given a title that had never existed before. She became the first human dragon ambassador, a bridge between two species that had seemed impossibly different, but were learning they had more in common than anyone had believed. A year later, Amy stood on a platform above a hatching chamber on the Vailorian homeworld. Beside her was Ember, now grown to full magnificent size, her scales shimmering with colors that seemed to dance in the light. Around them stood Vailorians and humans together, watching as a new clutch of eggs began to crack. The handlers waiting were not selected through trials or politics. They were chosen by the dragons themselves through a process no one fully understood. Some were Vailorian, some were human, and the bonds that formed that day were unlike anything in recorded history. Sorrenthos watched from the shadows with something new in his ancient eyes. He had not bonded with a dragon himself, was perhaps too old and too cold for such a connection. But he had spent the past year studying human emotion with the dedication he had once given to warfare. He was beginning to understand what warmth meant, even if he could not yet feel it himself. "You have changed us," he said to Amy as the hatching ceremony continued. "In 2 centuries of faster-than-light travel, humanity has accomplished what no other species managed in 10,000 years. You made us question ourselves." Amy smiled at him. "We did not do anything. We just showed you what was already there, buried beneath all that cold. The warmth was inside you the whole time. You just needed permission to feel it." Ember pressed her head against Amy's shoulder, and through their bond, Amy felt the dragon's contentment, her pride, her love. They had started something that would take generations to complete. A slow thawing of an ancient empire, a rediscovery of what it meant to feel and choose and love. In the darkness between stars, other dragons were beginning to dream. They dreamed of warmth, of freedom, of bonds that were offered rather than commanded. And one by one they began to reach toward the light. The galaxy was changing, not through war or conquest, but through something far more powerful. It was changing through the simple, radical act of offering warmth to something cold and alone. And it had all started with a human woman who picked up an egg because it needed her. That was what made humanity different. That was what made them strong. They did not need reasons to care. Caring was simply what they did. Ember spread her wings and let out a cry that echoed across the chamber, a sound of joy and triumph and hope that the Vailorians had not heard for 10,000 years. The cold was ending, and the warmth was just beginning.